On Father's Day morning, I opened a gift box from my daughter. Inside was a live snake. By sunset, I had revoked her credit cards, cut her out of my will, and filed a restraining order. It took me 30 years to realize sometimes love means saying no. On Father's Day, William Carr received a gift box that should have been a pleasant surprise. However, when his wife Jessica noticed the package, she whispered with urgency, warning him not to open it. The room fell into a heavy silence as William, puzzled, asked her why. Jessica pointed out something he hadn't noticed: tiny puncture holes on the sides of the box, barely visible, which sent a cold shiver down his spine. Breathing holes. Only 10 minutes later, the police arrived, their presence transforming their cozy suburban home into a tense crime scene. This Father's Day gift wasn't a gesture of love. It was a message of malice. What lay inside the box would unravel the fragile fabric of a family on the brink of implosion. Just days earlier, the Carr household had been the stage of an explosive confrontation. Samantha, their daughter, had burst into the living room, her voice sharp and demanding. Her manicured fingers trembled as she dropped a coffee cup onto the hardwood floor, shattering it, coffee bleeding into the intricate designs of their Persian rug. In her hand were the inheritance documents, a tangible representation of William's decades of labor, now reduced to leverage in Samantha's desperate pleas. William, a 66-year-old retired engineer, had spent 43 years building a stable future. His hands, now weathered and lined from years of toil, clutched the documents tighter as Samantha's accusations cut through the air. To her, money was the ultimate proof of love, the lifeline she demanded in her turbulent life filled with shopping sprees and gambling debts. Her husband, Peter, lounged on the sofa, smirking with entitlement, daring William to deny them once more. Jessica tried to mediate, her voice quivering as she twisted a dish towel in her hands. She urged them to talk calmly, but Samantha's rage was relentless. Her words, sharp as daggers, accused William of greed and selfishness. The air grew thick with tension as William recounted the sacrifices he had made for his family. The missed family dinners, the overtime shifts, and the vacations that never happened, all traded for Samantha's comfort and future security. Peter, embodying shameless opportunism, leaned forward, challenging William's authority. He labeled him an old man, mocked his hard-earned savings, and insinuated that William took pleasure in watching them struggle. But William, emboldened by years of silent endurance, finally snapped. He demanded they leave, their presence an unwelcome echo of entitlement. Samantha's threats hung in the air as she stormed out, vowing retribution. The slam of the door reverberated through the house, leaving an eerie stillness. Jessica, devastated, gathered the scattered documents while William stood frozen, grappling with the betrayal that unfolded before him. The silence, once a comfort, now felt oppressive. Days passed without a word from Samantha. The absence of her usual barrage of calls and texts was unsettling. Then came the unexpected package, a silent harbinger that arrived under the guise of a Father's Day gift. As the delivery truck drove away, Jessica's instincts screamed caution. The breathing holes hinted at something alive inside. The box sat ominously on the coffee table, its presence warping the cheerful ambiance of their living room. Every rustle from within sent their hearts racing when William contacted emergency services. His voice was tight with unease. The dispatcher advised them to maintain distance and await the arrival of law enforcement. The next 10 minutes stretched endlessly, the box's rustling and faint hissing amplifying their anxiety. The arrival of Officer Todd Reeves brought a temporary wave of relief. His calm demeanor and professional assessment of the situation injected a semblance of order. He confirmed their suspicions. The package likely contained a live animal. As he called for animal control, his investigative instincts kicked in, prompting him to probe who might have sent such a dangerous delivery. William hesitated, the weight of truth pressing against his lips. He couldn't bring himself to utter Samantha's name, to accept the horrifying possibility that their daughter had orchestrated this act of psychological warfare. Jessica's eyes pleaded for him to stay silent, to shield their family from further disgrace. Officer Reeves examined the package with meticulous care, maintaining a safe distance as he awaited the arrival of specialists. The hissing from within grew louder, more insistent, as if the contents were aware of the surrounding tension. William and Jessica stood united yet fractured, watching as years of parental love and sacrifice crumbled into suspicion and fear as they waited. Jessica's quiet voice broke the silence. She reflected on the moment when Samantha was a child, innocent and joyous, far removed from the manipulative woman she had become. William, too, mourned the loss of the daughter he once knew, the girl who had smiled from atop his shoulders at the county fair. The arrival of animal control would soon reveal the contents of the box, but the deeper revelation had already surfaced. This package was more than a threat. It was a manifestation of years of unresolved conflict, entitlement, and fractured love. The cars stood on the precipice of a devastating truth. Their family was no longer a sanctuary but a battlefield. The suspense loomed heavy as the package remained unopened, its secrets coiled within. Whatever lay inside would not only challenge their safety, but force them to confront the emotional wreckage of a family torn apart by greed, resentment, and betrayal. The motive had deliberately sent us a snake on Father's Day. Have you had any recent conflicts? Family disagreements? Family disagreements? The phrase hung in the air like an accusation. Jessica tensed beside me, both of us walking the tightrope between honesty and loyalty. Nothing that would lead to this, I managed. Officer Reeves studied my face, noting the hesitation, but he didn't push. Instead, he pulled out a small notebook. Any unusual charges on your credit cards recently? Pet stores? Exotic animal suppliers? The question hit me like a physical blow. Pet stores. The memory crashed over me with terrible clarity. That charge I'd noticed on last month's statement. Samantha used my credit card for emergencies. Reptile Palace 127.5. Oh, I'd assumed it was something for the grandchildren, not a snake. Never a snake. Mr. Carr, are you all right? I forced my expression back to neutral, though my heart hammered against my ribs. I'm fine, just processing all this. But I wasn't fine. The puzzle pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The timing, the knowledge of our routines, the access to my credit card, the deliberate cruelty of choosing Father's Day. My daughter had sent me a snake. Will you be filing a formal report? Officer Reeves asked. We can investigate the package origin, pursue charges if we identify the sender. I looked at Jessica, saw the same conflict behind her eyes. Part of me wanted justice, but the larger part, the part that had spent 34 years protecting Samantha despite her flaws, couldn't turn her over to the police. No, I said quietly, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill. If it's just a prank, filing charges seems excessive. Officer Reeves made a note, though his expression suggested he'd heard this response before. Family loyalty trumped justice, even when family members crossed dangerous lines. Another vehicle pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see a white van with Animal Control Services painted on the side. That'll be Mike Johnson, Officer Reeves said. Best wildlife specialist in the county. He'll have this resolved safely within the hour. But as I watched the animal control officer grab his equipment, I knew the real situation was just beginning. Mike Johnson, from animal control, worked with the methodical efficiency of someone who'd handled stranger situations than ours. Within 20 minutes, He'd safely extracted a 3-foot corn snake from the shipping box, confirmed it was non-venomous, and loaded it into a secure carrier for transport to a local reptile rescue. "Beautiful specimen," he said, securing the carrier. In his van, "Someone paid good money for this one. Corn snakes make excellent pets when properly cared for. Shame someone used it for whatever this was." Officer Reeves shook hands with both of us before departing. "Call if you remember anything else about possible senders, Mr. Carr. Even pranks like this can escalate if left unchecked." I nodded, maintaining the facade of cooperation while my mind churned with darker possibilities. Both vehicles disappeared. Down our quiet suburban street, leaving Jessica and me alone with the morning's aftermath. The living room felt different now, violated somehow, despite the professional cleanup. The coffee table bore faint water stains where Mike had disinfected the surface. The scattered inheritance documents had been restacked neatly, but their symbolic power had shifted. They were no longer tools of family planning, but evidence of the betrayal that had triggered this morning's events. Jessica busied herself in the kitchen, running water in the sink with unnecessary vigor. Stress cleaning, her standard response to family crises. I stood at the front window watching the Hendersons return from their Father's Day outing, their car loaded with picnic gear and children's laughter. Normal families, normal Sunday mornings, normal fathers who didn't receive venomous surprises from their daughters. The credit card charge burned in my memory like a brand. Reptile Palace 127.50, 3 weeks ago, right after we argued about inheritance. Perfect. Timing for planning revenge. My phone felt heavy in my hands as I scrolled to Samantha's contact information. Her smiling photo looked back at me, a picture from Emma's birthday party last year, before the financial demands had escalated, before the threats about grandchildren's access, before this morning's snake delivery. "Are you going to call her?" Jessica asked quietly from the kitchen doorway. "I need to know for certain. And if she admits it, the question hangs between us like a challenge. What would I do if my suspicions were confirmed? What action could a father take against a daughter who'd crossed such a fundamental line?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew the conversation was necessary. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "Dad?" Samantha's voice carried artificial brightness, the tone she used when she wanted something, or was hiding something. "How's your Father's Day going?" My grip tightened on the phone. "How's my Father's Day going?" If she were innocent, the question was natural. If she was guilty, it was a cruel mockery. "Interesting morning." I kept my voice neutral, conversational. "Samantha, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a strange Father's Day gift?" "No, Dad. What happened?" Her response came quickly, almost too quickly. But it was what happened next that confirmed my worst suspicions. In the background, unmistakably, I heard Peter's quiet laughter. Not the surprised chuckle of someone hearing unexpected news, but the satisfied snicker of someone who thought they'd gotten away with something clever. The sound hit me like a physical blow. Old doubt vanished in that moment of careless amusement. My daughter had sent me a snake, and her husband found it entertaining. Just some confusion with the delivery, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Nothing important. I should let you go." "Are you sure everything's okay? You sound strange." "Strange?" I was discovering that my only daughter had tried to terrorize me with a live reptile, and she thought I sounded strange. "Everything's fine, Samantha. Enjoy your Sunday." I ended the call before she could respond, before my carefully maintained composure could crack completely. The phone trembled in my hands as the full weight of betrayal settled over me. "Jessica." appeared at my side, reading my face with the intuition of 38 years of marriage. "You heard something?" Peter laughed. The words came out flat, emotionless, in the background. When she asked what happened, he laughed like it was the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Her hand found my arm, a steadying presence in the shifting landscape of our family dynamics. "What are you going to do?" I looked down at the phone, then toward my home office, where the computer held access to bank accounts, credit cards, and all the financial tools that had kept Samantha afloat for 3 years running. "I'm going to teach my daughter about consequences 7. A clock found me sitting in my home office, door closed, computer humming quietly in the evening stillness. I'd spent the afternoon in careful thought, walking through our neighborhood, reviewing 30 years of financial decisions that had brought us to this moment. The anger had settled into something colder, more purposeful. My desk held the accumulated evidence of a father's generosity. Bank statements showing monthly transfers to cover Samantha's rent, credit card bills I'd paid without question, insurance premiums, car payments, emergency loans that were never repaid, and 3 decades of enabling disguised as love. The leather portfolio beside my keyboard contained documents I'd reviewed dozens of times. Copies of checks written for her wedding, receipts from the car I'd sold to pay her gambling debts, and bank transfers labeled emergency assistance that had become monthly obligations. Each piece of paper told the same story of a daughter who had learned to see her father as an endless source of money rather than guidance. The computer screen glowed as I navigated to our online banking portal. My fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, typing the familiar passwords I'd never shared with Samantha, though she'd managed to access plenty without them. First, the credit card account, the same one that showed the Reptile Palace charge from 3 weeks ago. Samantha appeared as an authorized user, a status I'd granted her during college for emergencies. 20-year-old emergencies that had multiplied into a permanent lifestyle. I clicked on Manage Users. The system prompted me with security questions. My mother's maiden name, the street where I grew up, simple answers that unlocked access to tools I should have used years ago. Remove authorized users, the screen asked in neutral blue text. My cursor hovered over for perhaps 10 seconds, not from hesitation, but from the profound shift I felt occurring within myself. For 30 years I have funded your irresponsibility. Enough, I clicked. User access revoked. Changes will take effect. Within 1 business hour next came the PIN changes. Samantha had somehow learned the numbers, probably watching over my shoulder during one of our many financial rescue missions. I selected new digits, the year Jessica and I were married. Numbers. That meant something to our relationship, but nothing to our daughter's schemes. The automated payments required more attention. Monthly transfers to her checking account, the recurring payment for her car insurance, and a subscription service for her gym membership that she'd convinced me was essential for her mental health. Each cancellation required confirmation. Digital paper trail of my decision to stop being her private bank. My hands remained steady throughout the process. No trembling, no hesitation. This wasn't cruelty. It was overdue for accountability. I remembered the conversation last month when she'd called, sobbing about the gambling debts, how she'd promised this was the last time, the final crisis I'd need to solve. I'd believed her, transferred another $5,000, and told Jessica we were helping our daughter learn responsibility. Instead, I'd been teaching her that consequences were optional. The final screen showed a summary of changes. Credit access removed, automatic payments canceled, PIN codes updated, the work of 30 years of enabling undone in 30 minutes of methodical clicking. Save changes. Outside my office window, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm. The Hendersons were grilling dinner in their backyard. Mrs. Patterson walked her small dog past our mailbox. Normal families living normal lives, probably not dealing with adult children who sent live snakes as Father's Day gifts. I clicked save. The confirmation appeared instantly. Account changes processed. Updated information will be available immediately. Leaning back in my leather desk chair, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years when it came to Samantha: control, not the desperate, reactive scrambling to fix her latest crisis, but the calm authority of a parent who'd finally remembered that love sometimes requires saying no. Tomorrow morning, she would discover that her financial safety net had been removed. Her credit card would be declined. Her automatic payments would bounce. Her assumed access to my resources would simply end. For the first time in decades, the consequences of her choices would be entirely her responsibility. The phone on my desk remained silent, but I knew that wouldn't last long. Morning arrived with unusual peace. I sat at our kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, watching sunlight filter through Jessica's herb garden on the windowsill. For the first time in years, I felt no anxiety about potential financial emergencies, no dread of manipulative phone calls. Jessica moved quietly around the kitchen, refilling my coffee cup with the comfortable efficiency of 38 years of shared mornings. She'd asked no questions about my evening in the office, but her slight smile suggested she understood perfectly what I'd accomplished. The phone rang at 8:15. Samantha's name appeared on the caller ID, exactly as expected. I let it ring twice more before answering, using those extra seconds to center myself. Good morning, Samantha. Dad, what have you done? My card isn't working. Her voice hit me like a physical assault, shrill with panic. I tried to buy groceries, but it was declined. The automatic payment from my car insurance bounced. What is happening? I took a sip of coffee before responding. Samantha, I know you sent me that Father's Day gift. The silence stretched for several heartbeats. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted from panic to defensive fury. You've lost your mind. How could you set me up like this? Set her up. Not what are you talking about, or what Father's Day gift. The woman who had sent me a snake was now accusing me of setting traps. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. I didn't do anything, I said calmly. I simply stopped paying for your irresponsibility. This is insane. You can't just cut me off without warning. I have bills, obligations, and responsibilities. I let the word hang between us, like the responsibility to treat your parents with basic respect, like the responsibility to handle your finances instead of depending on mine. Jessica had stopped her morning routine to watch my face, reading my expressions for signs of stress, but I felt remarkably calm, almost detached from Samantha's hysteria. Dad, please, you don't understand. Peter and I are struggling right now. The apartment rent is due, and my car payment, your car payment that I've been making for 2 years. Your apartment rent comes out of my account every month. Perhaps it's time you understood what actual financial responsibility looks like. Fine. You want to play games? Her voice rose to a pitch that would have concerned me yesterday. Don't expect to see your grandchildren anytime soon. Emma and Jake won't even remember you by the time. Samantha, I cut her off with quiet firmness. Those, threats stopped working yesterday morning. The phone went silent except for her rapid breathing. I could almost hear her recalibrating, searching for the manipulation tactic that had always worked before. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she whispered, switching to the victim's voice that had opened my wallet countless times. I'm your daughter. I'm struggling. And instead of helping me, you're punishing me for something I didn't even do. something she didn't even do. Still, no direct denial, no confusion about what gift I'd referenced. Just a blanket deflection of someone who knew exactly what she'd done and was angry about facing. Consequences your struggle is not my responsibility. I said, your choices created your situation. Your choices sent that package. Your choices will determine what happens next. You're being ridiculous. One little prank and you completely lose your mind. One little prank, there it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough to confirm what her panicked overreaction had already revealed. She'd sent me a live snake as a little prank and now expected me to continue funding her lifestyle. A prank involving a dangerous animal isn't little, Samantha. And a father cutting off financial support after 30 years of enabling isn't. Losing his mind, it's finally finding it. Her voice turned arctic. This isn't over, old man. You think you can control me by controlling money? We'll see about that. The line went dead. I set the phone down gently and looked at Jessica, who had watched the entire conversation with growing admiration. The morning sunlight still streamed through her herbs. The coffee still tasted perfect. She's coming here, Jessica sighed quietly. I nodded, probably with Peter. They'll want to continue this conversation in person. Are you ready for that? I thought about the question seriously. Was I ready for my daughter to arrive at our home with her unemployed husband, demanding access to money she'd never earned, threatening grandchildren she'd already weaponized? Yes, I said. I think I am. The sound of a car engine roaring into our driveway shattered the morning calm. Tires squealed against asphalt as the vehicle stopped abruptly, followed by the sharp slam of two car doors. Jessica and I exchanged a glance. We both knew who had arrived. Heavy footsteps marched across our front walkway with a determined rhythm. The doorbell rang once, sharp and demanding, then immediately again when no one answered fast enough. I stood slowly, feeling remarkably calm despite the approaching storm. Stay here, I told Jessica quietly. No, her voice carried unexpected strength. We're in this together. The doorbell gave way to aggressive knocking. I walked to the front entrance and opened it to find Samantha and Peter standing on our porch like a two-person army ready for battle. Samantha's face was flushed red with anger, her hair disheveled as if she had dressed hastily and driven here in fury. Peter loomed behind her, his expression dark with malice I'd never seen directed at me before. Dad, Samantha's voice vibrated with barely controlled rage. We need to talk. We already talked this morning. I remained in the doorway, not inviting. Them inside? I thought I was quite clear. Clear? She laughed harshly. You were insane. You can't just cut me off because of some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package. Even now, standing on my doorstep demanding money, she couldn't bring herself to admit what she'd done. There's no misunderstanding, Samantha. You sent me a snake, I responded appropriately. Peter stepped forward, his bulk filling more of the doorway. Look, old man, maybe you didn't think this through properly. Samantha has expenses, responsibilities. Kids need things, kids whose mother threatens to keep them away from their grandparents when she doesn't get money, I replied evenly. Samantha's face contorted with desperate fury. Fine. You want to play hardball? You'll never see your grandchildren again. Emma and Jake will grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over family? The words that had once been my greatest fear now felt powerless against the clarity I'd gained. I looked at my daughter and saw not the child I'd raised, but the manipulative stranger she'd become. Samantha, I said quietly, that's not a threat. That's a blessing. The shock on her face was complete. This was not the response she'd expected, not the devastating blow that had always brought me to my knees before. Peter's mouth fell open. You. What? Samantha stammered. If you're the kind of person who uses children as weapons against their grandparents, then perhaps they shouldn't be exposed to that kind of manipulation. While their young Peter's expression shifted to something darker, he stepped forward close enough that I could smell the anger radiating from him. "We know where you live, old man," he said, his voice low and menacing. "We know your routines, your schedule. You might want to reconsider your position." I felt Jessica tense behind me, but I remained perfectly still. "Are you threatening me, Peter?" "I'm just saying that family relationships work both ways. You want to cut us off? Fine, but don't expect us to just disappear quietly." I said, "That's exactly what I expected. And if you choose not to disappear quietly, that becomes a matter for the police rather than family negotiation." Samantha grabbed Peter's arm, perhaps sensing he was pushing into territory that could have legal consequences, but her touch didn't calm him. It seemed to fuel his aggression. "You think you're so smart?" Peter continued. "You think cutting off our money makes you powerful? There are other ways to get what we need?" "I'm sure there are," I agreed. "Like getting jobs, for instance, novel concepts. But people have been supporting themselves through employment for centuries." "This isn't over," Samantha hissed, her desperation transforming into pure venom. "You'll regret treating us like this. Family doesn't abandon family, and there will be consequences." "There already are consequences," I said. "You're living them right now." The man who had spent 30 years being their bank had simply closed. Without another word, Samantha spun on her heel and stalked back to their car. Peter followed, but not before giving me one last menacing look. I watched them drive away, their car engine revving unnecessarily loudly. Only when their taillights disappeared did I close the front door and turn to Jessica. Her face was pale, but her eyes held something I hadn't seen in years. Pride. "We're going to need legal advice," I said. Evening brought the quiet normalcy that had become precious in our house. Jessica and I sat at our kitchen table after dinner, the domestic routine providing comfort after the morning's chaos. She sipped chamomile tea while I nursed my second cup of coffee, both of us processing the day's events. The kitchen had always been our sanctuary for serious conversations. It was here we discussed buying the house, planned for retirement, and talked through concerns about Samantha's early struggles with money. Now it served as the place where we contemplated the complete breakdown of our family relationship. "I keep thinking about when she was 8, Jessica said quietly. "Remember the Mother's Day breakfast she made? Burned toast and orange juice with too much pulp, but she was so proud." I did remember. Samantha, in her pink pajamas, standing on a kitchen stool to reach the counter, determined to surprise us with breakfast in bed. The memory felt like it belonged to someone else's family now. "She used to draw us pictures," I said. "Stick figures of our family holding hands. I kept them in my office desk drawer for years. I still have some in that memory box upstairs." Jessica's voice carried maternal grief. "William, she's still our daughter despite everything that's happened today." The words I'd been expecting all day. Jessica's instinct to heal, to find middle ground, to somehow restore what had been broken. It was one of the qualities I'd fallen in love with. "This unwavering belief that families could overcome anything, Jess," I said gently. She crossed a line. "I have one more step to take." Her teacup paused halfway to her lips. "What kind of step?" I looked at my wife's face, seeing the concern there. The hope that whatever I was planning might somehow bring our daughter back instead of pushing her further away. How could I explain that bringing her back was no longer the goal? "Something permanent," I said. "Something that ensures this morning's scene never happens again." "You're talking about changing the will." It wasn't a question. Jessica knew me well enough to follow my thought process, to understand that legal protection was the only solution left. "Among other things, yes." She was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with the implications. Changing our estate planning would be more than a financial decision. It would be a formal acknowledgement that our daughter was no longer trustworthy. The grandchildren, she said finally. Emma and Jake will be better off not learning that love can be purchased with money. I reached across the table and took her hand. Jessica, what she did today wasn't desperation. It was calculated cruelty. The snake, the threats, the manipulation, that's who she's chosen to become. But if we cut her out completely, we protect ourselves from future abuse. We protect our marriage from constantly managing her crisis. We protect our retirement from being slowly drained away by someone who sees us as a resource rather than parents. Jessica squeezed my hand, her thumb tracing across my knuckles, in the gesture that had comforted me through decades of smaller challenges. Will it stop her? She asked. If you change everything legally, will she finally leave us alone? It will remove her incentive for contact. No access to money, no inheritance to protect, no leverage to maintain. She have to find other people to manipulate. The pragmatism of it felt cold but necessary. Samantha would move on to easier targets, people who hadn't yet learned to recognize her patterns. I hate that it's come to this, Jessica whispered. So do I, but I won't spend our remaining years being held hostage by threats and manipulation. I won't let her destroy what we've built together. Outside our kitchen window, the suburban evening continued its peaceful rhythm. The Hendersons were walking their dog. Mrs. Patterson was watering her garden. Normal people living normal lives. When will you do it? Jessica asked. Tomorrow morning. I'll call Margaret Summers first thing. She's handled our legal work for 15 years. She knows exactly what needs to be done to make it ironclad. Jessica nodded slowly, accepting the inevitable, even as it broke her heart. And if Samantha finds out? She will eventually, but by then, the legal protections will be in place. Her anger won't be able to touch us anymore. I stood up from the table, carrying our empty cups to the sink. Behind me, I heard Jessica's quiet sigh. Not disagreement, but grief for the daughter we'd lost tomorrow. I will take that final step. Tonight, I would hold my wife and let her mourn the family we thought we were. Margaret Summers' law office occupied the third floor of a granite building downtown. Its walls lined with legal volumes that spoke of 15 years protecting families like ours. I sat across from her mahogany desk with a manila folder of documents, feeling calmer than I had in weeks. William, she said, removing her reading glasses. When you called this morning, you mentioned needing comprehensive legal protection. Tell me what's been happening. Margaret had handled our wills, property transfers, and Jessica's mother's estate. She knew us as the stable couple who planned and paid bills promptly. What I was about to describe would sound like a different family entirely. I explained the inheritance argument, the snake delivery, the blocked credit cards, and yesterday's threatening confrontation. Margaret listened without interruption, occasionally making notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. They know where we live, know our routines, I concluded. It felt like a direct threat. She set down her pen and leaned back. William, this goes beyond a family disagreement. You're describing harassment and intimidation. We need to address this on multiple fronts. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Margaret pulled out a fresh legal pad. Let's start with your will. You mentioned wanting to restructure your inheritance. I want my money to go to my grandchildren's education, not to my daughter's casino. I said, that's a wise decision, William. Her voice carried professional warmth. We can create an educational trust fund that provides for Emma and Jake's schooling, college expenses, and legitimate educational needs while preventing any access by their parents. She outlined the framework. An independent trustee would manage the funds, releasing money only for documented educational expenses. Samantha and Peter would have no access, no control, and no ability to manipulate the children's inheritance. What about Jessica? I asked, fully protected, of course. The house, your retirement accounts, her security, nothing changes there. This only affects what would have gone to Samantha. Next came the restraining order documentation. Margaret opened a new file and began systematically recording yesterday's confrontation, the threatening language, the escalating pattern that had culminated in actual intimidation. The snake incident is particularly concerning, she said, writing quickly. Using live animals to frighten elderly parents shows planning and malice that courts take seriously. How long does this process take? The will modifications can be finalized within the week. The restraining order can be filed today. Once it's granted, any contact from Samantha or Peter becomes a legal matter rather than a family dispute. I felt something release in my chest, a tension I'd been carrying for months. The weight of being perpetually available for Samantha's crisis, of walking on eggshells to avoid triggering her threats, of enabling destructive behavior, all of it was ending. There's one more thing, Margaret said. Based on what you've described, I recommend documenting everything for potential future legal action. Keep records of any attempts to contact you, any violations, any attempts to involve the grandchildren. You think it will get worse before it gets better. People who use manipulation and threats don't usually accept boundaries gracefully. When Samantha discovers she's been cut out of your will and served with a restraining order, her reaction may be significant. But that no longer frightened me. With legal protections in place, her anger would be directed at a system designed to handle such behavior, not at two elderly parents trying to enjoy their retirement. Margaret's assistant brought in the prepared documents. As I signed my name to each page, I felt the satisfying finality of decisions made and implemented. 30 years of financial enabling were officially ending. Our home would be legally protected from harassment. The restraining order should be approved by the end of business today, Margaret said. Court officers will serve both Samantha and Peter by tomorrow morning. After that, any contact with you or Jessica becomes a criminal matter. I stood to leave, shaking hands with the woman who had just helped me reclaim control of my own life. Outside her office windows, the city continued its normal rhythm. William, Margaret called as I reached her door. You've made the right choices. Your family's safety and security come first. I nodded, tucking the folder under my arm. Tomorrow morning, Samantha would discover that manipulation was no longer an option. Tonight, Jessica and I would sleep peacefully, knowing the law was finally on our side. 2 days passed in the most peaceful quiet I'd experienced in years. Jessica and I fell back into the comfortable routines that had been constantly interrupted by Samantha's crises. Morning coffee without dreading phone calls, afternoon walks without checking for missed messages, and evening dinners without discussing the latest financial emergency. On Thursday afternoon, Margaret called to confirm what I'd been anticipating. William, the documents were delivered at 2:15 today. Both Samantha and Peter have been served with the restraining order, and they've received copies of the will modifications. It's done. I thanked her and hung up, then sat quietly in my chair for several minutes. Outside our window, Mrs. Patterson was planting spring flowers in her garden. The Hendersons' children were riding bicycles on the sidewalk. Normal suburban life continuing its peaceful rhythm. The papers were delivered. Jessica asked from the kitchen doorway, this afternoon. I confirmed. It's finished. She came and sat beside me, taking my hand in hers. We didn't need to discuss what Samantha's reaction might be. or whether she would try to find ways around the legal barriers Margaret had erected. The law was clear. The protections were comprehensive, and for the first time in 30 years, we were truly free from her manipulation. I thought about the daughter I'd raised, the little girl who'd drawn stick figure families and made breakfast in bed on special occasions. That child had grown into someone who sent live snakes to her father and threatened to weaponize his grandchildren against him. The legal documents had created the boundaries that love alone could never establish. Samantha had spent years threatening to cut off my access to Emma and Jake whenever I didn't comply with her financial demands. Now, through her escalating behavior, she'd ensured that the separation was permanent, while simultaneously losing any claim to the inheritance she'd been so desperate to control. Jessica squeezed my hand. "Do you think she understands what she's lost?" "She will," I said. "The restraining order means any attempt to contact us becomes a criminal matter. The will changes mean there's no inheritance to fight for, no financial incentive to maintain, even hostile contact. She have to find other people to manipulate, and if she violates the restraining order, then it becomes the police department's problem, not ours." For 30 years, I'd been Samantha's safety net, catching her every fall, while she learned nothing from the experience. The snake had been her final communication with me, but instead of driving me back into compliance, it had driven me to Margaret's office and the legal protections I should have sought years earlier. As the sun set through our kitchen window, Jessica and I prepared dinner together with the easy cooperation of a couple who no longer carried the weight of constant family drama. No phone calls interrupted our conversation. No emergency texts demanded immediate financial rescue. No threats hung over our heads about access to grandchildren. The quiet felt profound, like the silence after a long, exhausting storm has finally passed. Tomorrow, we will wake up in a house legally protected from harassment. Our retirement savings would remain intact, earning interest for our security rather than being slowly drained by someone else's poor choices. Our marriage would continue without the constant stress of managing an adult child's manufactured crisis. I had reclaimed my role as a father who loved his daughter enough to refuse to enable her destruction of herself and others. Legal boundaries have replaced emotional manipulation. Professional consequences have replaced family guilt. The law had given me back my life tonight for the first time in decades. I would sleep without wondering what tomorrow's crisis would cost me. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for reading.